English translation. 898th contact. Saturday, 5th October, 2024. 8:48 hours.
Do not be alarmed if we disturb you in your work, in which you are so obviously intensely absorbed that you have evidently not noticed our appearance behind your back, and we are addressing you. Greetings, however, dear father friend, greetings.
Yes, please excuse me if we have come upon you so unexpectedly, as you did not know we were coming here. But I am glad to see you safe and sound, and greetings, dear friend.
Yes, welcome, and the fact that I startle when I'm at work is because I am focused on what I am working on. I also wake up when Ava comes in. She works next door in her office, but I do not pay attention to what is going on there, so sometimes I just startle, like you are now, because I am absorbed in my work.
That is understandable, but what work are you doing at the moment?
Oh, I've been working on my new book for a long time, which I started about 10 or 11 months ago. Unfortunately, I always have other things to do because there is a lot of work that needs to be done around the house and grounds, so I am busy elsewhere and cannot work on the book. On the other hand, there is also a lot of office work that needs to be done, and so the book writing does not progress, because unexpectedly something comes up again.
Like now that we are here and you are working on your new work.
Yes, but that does not matter. Today is Sunday, and I thought that I could write the new book again. Ava has gone to the airport with Selena because Atlant, Nugning, and Arin are flying away on holiday to Nugning's parents in Thailand for 14 days. But now that is not possible.
We really did not want to scare you.
Let it be good, because it is always a great pleasure for me when you come.
We have come here because we have come across some very interesting records in the Annals of Svath, which Quetzal will tell you about, because he will also be coming here. But first, we would like to discuss our personal concerns with you, which are very important to us, and
That is really the case because
I understand that consequently I can only say to that and give the advice that, and to say more about it, that would be like carrying water into the Rhine, as we say when something...
yes, I understand. But thank you for your words.
I second that.
But I wonder now what you found in Svath's annals that you want to talk to me about it.
Quetzal will bring it up as soon as he is here. It will not be long now. He is reliable in this regard, as he also always is elsewhere. But I would like to say that on Earth, the entire population is really being kept in the dark about what is actually happening in the vastness of the planet. Every day I look at all the information that is broadcast on television about the events that are happening on Earth in such a way that they are actually so important that Earth humans should be informed about them. In particular, it would be important that the Earth's population be informed, which is not happening, that events are occurring that cannot be considered natural. This applies, for example, to many events that are effectively the fault of Earth humans, such as the many criminal machinations that are causing such irreversible damage to the planet and its nature and, in turn, its entire fauna and flora, that the whole thing cannot be put right or reversed in the foreseeable future. Therefore,
Please excuse me for interrupting you, but I also have all sorts of things to say about that, because in this regard, all the admonitions and explanations from Earthlings simply talk into the wind. They simply do not want to understand, and also do not want to hear that too many human beings are populating the Earth, and that there is a massive overpopulation that is destroying everything and everyone with its machinations, the planet, nature, fauna, and flora, as well as the atmosphere and the climate. But now the consequences are materializing, as I predicted years ago in the 1940s and also in this millennium, because I was with Svath in the time of the future, which has now come and will continue to come, just as we have seen and experienced what is to come. And it was all conjured up by the rapidly growing overpopulation and its machinations in only about 75 years, which the Earth itself has never managed to do in 5 billion years. And then idiots and other lunatics come along and proclaim that more births of Earthlings are necessary, such as the lowly intelligent imbecilities of the rulers in Germany, Russia and Switzerland, etc., who also want to make a mess of biodiversity. This is because these bogus thinkers cannot grasp a correct thought in their imbecility, and also cannot recognize that biodiversity is vital for all existence on Earth. That is to say, also for the Earthling itself. But not motorways, football pitches and other sports grounds, factories, airfields, houses, and armies, for which an enormous amount of money is wasted anyway, while the less well-off of the population die miserably because the state does not help them. But all this also goes unnoticed, as does the fact that, as a result of the overpopulation of human beings, all the diseases to which so many human beings are addicted worsen and intensify every decade or so, just as they occur more frequently and require new research again and again in order to renew the tried and tested medicines that are becoming ineffective and make them usable again. But everything is also going wrong in terms of nature, with blatant overpopulation again being the absolute culprit, with the atmosphere being poisonously polluted and the climate being made even more of a mess than it already is. For example, various tree genera and species are dying and dying, just as many other genera and species of plants are also withering miserably, being wiped out and also releasing CO2 instead of absorbing it, and thus detoxifying the atmosphere and keeping it breathable for all atmospheric breathers. The human beings of Earth are mendaciously called oxygen breathers, although the Earth's atmosphere contains only about 21% oxygen, about 78% nitrogen, about 0.93% argon, and about 0.04% carbon dioxide, which means that most of them breathe nitrogen, an odorless noble gas, which means that the human being of Earth is a partial nitrogen breather, not a pure oxygen breather, but only about 21%. Now, the fact that humanity is being served up unimaginable frauds, lies, and other swindles by various unrighteous rulers, the righteous are excluded, should finally be understood. Otherwise, the EU countries could not have their freedom restricted even more by von der Leyen, who is probably the one doing all the traveling, and be bogged down, which is again in preparation by this dictatorship, whereby the EU countries will come even more under the EU dictatorship's thumb. However, the people will probably only be told this when there is no way back. But this will probably also be kept quiet, as will certainly also the huge rainstorm in the Sahara, as water accumulations have formed like lakes, as we three could see everything when we flew there with a time delay. The public will probably not find out about this, because the whole thing has been irreparably damaged by the undeniable guilt of the Earthlings through their overpopulation as a result of their destructive machinations on the planet, nature and its fauna and flora, as well as the atmosphere and the climate as a whole. The truth of what has happened should also be concealed in this respect.
Unfortunately, this is so and cannot be changed.
Unfortunately, but something could be changed for the good and correct in the future if Earth humans would listen to what they are being warned and act positively on it, which they obviously do not do, because your warning remarks, which you have been giving repeatedly and tirelessly for around 50 years now, have gone unheard. But now Quetzal comes forward and says that he is coming
And here he is. Greetings, my friend Quetzal. Take this chair, which I have still had here since yesterday, and sit down.
Greetings also, Edward, my friend. As Florena and Enjana must have informed you, we want to bring up some of the things we read in my grandfather's Annals. Svath explained to you at that time, as is recorded very precisely in the Annals, that he explained to you America's hegemonic behavior, and how this would also be pursued in the future completely without hesitation, and insidiously far into the third millennium, and insidiously pursued to realization, namely by America having acts of war carried out by power-hungry foreign states, whereby America could fulfill its wishes in the future, at least hope to fulfill them. And what he explained to you, you wrote in a poem.
Oh yes, it comes back to me, but I cannot remember what I wrote back then. But I do know that I have something to say about what is going on in the world and what should be done responsibly against all the crimes, against the criminally acting government leaders of many countries, against all kinds of evil. The fact that I list and say everything in the word has absolutely nothing to do with politicizing, because I really have nothing to do with that. What I am saying is simply the existing fact of what is effective, and what should be done to end evil, wrong, and inhumanity. I am not claiming that my measures to be taken are the only correct ones, because other measures by other human beings can be more effective, more efficient, and more effective, but only if they do not consistently endanger or harm the life and limb of those who do wrong. However, if I now think about what Svath said, which I am realizing again, then it is the case that this is also currently the case in Ukraine. Namely, that exactly what Svath said is happening. Namely, that America is working criminally in the background in the war in Ukraine, and is secretly involved. And the fact that around 50 countries or their governments and supporters are still lowly intelligent and simple-mindedly involved by supplying weapons and money to Zelensky, of course only through America's incitement, and especially through the evil and irresponsible efforts and agitation of the American war fanatic and U.S. President Biden, will end badly. I would also like to say that those who supply money and weapons to Zelensky, or who are on friendly terms with him regarding the war, are nothing other than criminals, despisers of humanity and also evil traitors to humanity. This also applies to the German Foreign Minister Baerbock, who, in partisanship and ignorance of the whole, stupidly proclaims that Israel has the right to self-defense. But what Netanyahu is allowing his army to do in the Gaza Strip and Lebanon has nothing to do with self-defense or warfare, because the whole of his orders and actions is a vengeful, vicious, blind, and very bloody massacre of innocent human beings, of Arabs, whom he wants to exterminate through genocide as a result of his madness. He will even go so far as to deliberately attack stations of the so-called Blue Helmets or UN peacekeepers in Lebanon through his military in order to drive them out of the areas that he wants to bloodily conquer and exterminate the population. However, he will deny everything as an accident, although he will have secretly and underhandedly given the order to do so. But the world's leaders do nothing about this, instead believing his lies and letting him get away with it, and supplying this mass murderer with weapons, like America and Germany. For example, instead of arresting him and keeping him in a safe place where he can do no more harm or mischief for the rest of his life. His actions not only cause countless deaths and hardship, misery, destruction and grief, etc., but also worldwide unjustified hatred against the Jewish people, who do not agree with the blind and murderous actions of Netanyahu and his army, but are ignored by this mass murderer and his murderous henchmen. As a result, anti-Semitism is once again spreading worldwide and creating new mischief. And demonstrations against this mass murderer, as against war in the world in general, are completely pointless and, on the contrary, only create hatred and even more so revenge, which leads to disputes and murders. This creates even more mischief, which arises from everything. And the same mischief-making applies not only to the Israeli mass murderer Netanyahu, whose name is supposed to mean what is given by God, but also to his evil supporters and all like-minded people in all countries. Netanyahu is actually of Polish descent, and his former name was Milikowski, so he is denying his true origins by adopting a different name. Netanyahu is really not only waging a very murderous war against the Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, and against all the like-minded people in Lebanon, because he is really carrying out an overall attempt at genocide against the Arabs in order to eliminate them from the world. He hates the Arabs like the plague, which is why he is also trying to enforce his delusion of genocide regarding the total extermination of the Arabs with all evil violence. Of course, Putin and Russia can also be mentioned, who started the war in Ukraine because America wanted to station the NATO murderous organization in Ukraine for the sake of terror, and thus on the border of Russia. As a woman of Russian descent told me about a year ago in Wetsikon in this formulating way, when I had to have my necessary injection for macula in the left eye, which I now have to do every second month. However, I was also told that many people in Russia had become resentful and hateful, and were downright hostile towards Germany because of the arms deliveries to Zelensky. In Palestine, however, Hamas are also no angels, meaning zeal, enthusiasm, or fighting spirit, although they are a Sunni Islamist organization, and also radical Islamists who attacked the state of Israel around a year ago. The mindset and the goal of Hamas is to destroy the state of Israel, which means that they reject Israel's right to exist, and, following the principle of armed jihad, use acts of war to try to wipe Israel off the map, or to completely eliminate this state and, if possible, eliminate it altogether. It was probably in 1988, if I remember correctly, that the Islamic resistance movement issued a so-called charter, which contained a comprehensive and undoubtedly clear manifesto consisting of 6 separate paragraphs, namely a public declaration of the central goal and intention that the Hamas movement should be aimed at the total destruction of the State of Israel through jihad or holy Islamic war, and was therefore propagated in this way. But there is also the Zaydid Houthi movement, or the Houthis movement from the southwestern region of the Arabian Peninsula, a Shiite group in Yemen whose hatred of Israel goes so far that it is even firmly immortalized on their flag, which reads, "Death to Israel, damn the Jews." The USA and Saudi Arabia are not popular with the Houthis either, so it is probably no wonder that America is also targeting and bombing Yemen. Just as America interferes wherever war is possible, and where there is a chance of realizing the hegemonic delusion in the future. In particular, and I cannot avoid mentioning this, in Ukraine, where billions upon billions of dollars are being poured into weapons and ammunition to bring death and destruction. Destruction and annihilation far into Russia, in order to force Russia to the ground in this wise and make it ripe for the fulfillment of America's hegemony delusion. These are the facts that are actually only recognized and understood by an extremely small proportion of the world's population. The majority of Earth humans are lukewarm and have little interest in the real background to the insane, confused and dangerous political machinations that are hostile to peace, promote conflict, and encourage war. The rule among the people is that they either swear about this and that in politics or judge something as good and right, but without knowing what is really behind it all. A good or bad opinion is only formed afterwards, when something is not correct or not working. Before that, however, no thought is given to what is correct or wrong, and everything is endorsed without hesitation, which very often turns out to be wrong afterwards and gives the rulers and their satellites so much might that the people are enslaved and oppressed, if not miserably dying as a result. There is also Persia, or the Islamic Theocratic Republic of Iran, for which no life is good and valuable enough not to be destroyed by execution for trivial reasons, except when it comes to the lives of the rulers themselves. This, such as that of the supreme religious leader, who holds his office for life, who is also the boss of the army, and is also monstrously and uniquely vengeful. The supreme leader, Sayyid, that is to say, Ali Khamenei Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hosseini Khamenei, with the highest authority in Iran, hides behind all the crazy religious fluff of Shiitism, which forms the largest part of the religious believers with about 90%, while another 7 or 8% of the population belong to the Sunni faith. But there are also other believers, such as Mandeans, Christians, Baha'is, Jews, Yassanists, and Alay-Haq, etc., along with a few others, and also a few non-believers who call themselves atheists. Now, with regard to atheism, the following should be said for clarification. So-called atheists, although this word actually comes from the ancient Greek and means nothing other than without God, and other non-denominational believers also indulge in a faith, because their belief is based on the fact that there is no God, no gods, and no supernatural might. This is correct, namely that there is neither God, gods, nor supernatural might. But this is believed by atheists and possibly by various non-denominationals, and therefore corresponds to a faith. So atheism is also a form of faith, or rather a touch of faith, which means that the atheist absolutely or especially worships and dignifies his opinion in order to be generally regarded as a human being in the wise, who is not a believer and therefore above all not a believer in God and not a believer in a supernatural might. But all this has nothing to do with free thinking or free thought, which is solely orientated towards accepting reality and its truth. Free thinking is based on the fact that human beings always logically see, hear, recognize, feel, and perceive reality, and thus effectively the truth, through their understanding and reason, which is necessary and therefore inevitable for every single thing, etc. A complete and therefore absolute. Fathoming of every detail in every conceivable way and wise is necessary in order to effectively grasp and also understand reality and its truth as such. Only then can and may it be said that the human being is completely and utterly free of faith. The atheistic way of thinking is therefore not sufficient for this, nor is non-denominationalism, because only reality and its truth show and allow human beings to think freely in all respects, and to be absolutely certain that something specific actually corresponds to what is called truth, which is always reality and never a belief. But now I have deviated from what still needs to be said. A human being will not be spared from committing murder and mass murder if he has to go to war. Because every war leader, whether master of war or soldier, is guilty of murder and mass murder if he kills human beings, whether they are known to him or not. Consequently, every military army, of course, NATO, which is a state-sanctioned global murder organization, as well as a private army or a group of guerrillas or insurgents, etc., is formed by human beings who, when they go or have to go to war or otherwise into battle and kill, then become murderers and mass murderers. And also then, an army is not immune from becoming a murder organization if it is only kept as armed neutrality, or for peacekeeping, or for possible defense. An army, such as that of armed neutrality, which is kept for all emergencies at immense cost, as is also the case in Switzerland, for example, remains a potential killer army. The immense amount of money that is wasted on weapons, and the entire operation of any small or large army in a small country that would not stand an iota of a chance if it were invaded by a state with a large army is as idiotically wasted and nonsensical as carrying a bucket of water into the Rhine to prevent it from drying up. In short, if, sooner or later, an army has to go to war, etc., every soldier will kill another human being without any pardon as a result of warlike necessity, even if military superiors also only give an order to kill.
Yes, that corresponds to what really is. And what you say is a fact. America is involved in everything in Ukraine and also in Israel, secretly plans everything and achieves what it actually wants to achieve, but conceals the fact that it directs everything, but blames everything on this stupid actor, who is really only lowly intelligent, and therefore a non-thinker and a fake thinker. He is not able to see clearly and neither recognize nor judge clearly, nor also to decide what is actually being played and intended by America. He is just a lowly intelligent and willing tool of America that will be cast aside when it has done its duty. And what will come, and what the future will bring, is something you both saw and experienced for yourselves in the future, about which you then wrote a poem that Svath listed in the Annals. As he also noted, Father Zimmermann sent this poem to some daily newspapers in Switzerland and Germany.
That is indeed the way it is. When I think about it and consider the facts I know, I come to the conclusion that almost all state leaders worldwide are just self-serving elements who do not listen to the people entrusted to them, but only push through their own interests of might, but in no way also accept anything from the people in the wise or do anything useful for them.
You can say that out loud because what you say corresponds to the effectively indisputable facts, which, however, are generally accepted without contradiction, and even accepted by the peoples. In this respect, it does not work the way it does for you, that what the people can say and determine should then be effective and is also actually implemented, because it is the people who determine, but not simply rulers.
Logically, I can only agree with Quetzal's words because they correspond to the truth. And I can also only agree with everything you have said because there is absolute logic in your words.
I agree with Quetzal on that. But what I wrote back in the 1940s, it occurs to me that Svath asked me to write something about what he said. I can remember that now, but what I wrote, I have completely forgotten. I really do not remember.
That is what I thought, because it was 2 centuries ago, and it is really only natural that something should be forgotten. I feel the same way because the aging of human beings makes them forget a lot of things. What else is worth mentioning? In the Annals it is written that you wrote other poems that grandfather also recorded.
Perhaps because he was always interested in my poems, and I wrote many there, as well as sayings, essays, and experiences, etc., which I put down in writing. These must also be recorded in Svath's Annals.
This is, as I said, known to me from the Annals, also that you sometimes regaled Svath with it when you sang a song. And I know that Sim Yase also enjoyed it, as she told me herself when we were discussing various things from your years together.
That may be because I used to sing a lot, and I also sang on many tapes, and people often said that I was competing with this or that performer. But these tapes were all stolen from me when...
That might really be the case, although...
Just that is why I say maybe. But whether that is really the case, I do not know. It is just a possibility, but how the tapes got lost I really do not know, and it is also useless to think about it.
That is the way it is.
Exactly. So there's also no point in brooding about it. It is the way it is, and it will also stay that way, and besides, I am not really interested because it is the past. And I let it rest, because I was taught by my parents at an early age that the past should not be mourned, but that all the good things and love should be remembered. If only because this always helps to lift my mood mentally when it sinks for whatever reason.
Your parents were very wise human beings, as my grandfather specifically listed in his annals. He wrote that it was a special honor for him to have met them when the family doctor, Dr. Strabel, was afraid that you would not live to see the morning at the age of 6 months as a result of the pneumonia that afflicted you.
I never really wanted to talk about that, which is why I think
No, I do not agree with that because I think you want a ... But now, if you are interested, what did you write back then? Svath wrote it in German script and I photographed it for you.
Yes, let us see what clever things I wrote back then. It was so long ago, yes, I'm sore. How old was I back then? 11 or so, I think. But let me read.
What America will bring in the future.
First of all, with a clear word to mention is on and on, that it must be said up front that in the future there will be a lament for the future of humanity. With misery, hardship, much death, and severe pain. The peoples of Earth are divided by war. The world war of the Nazi Empire is now over, but now the destructive time is coming upon the world, with death and destruction, and evil will befall humanity. Or the whole of the East is under pressure from America, bringing hegemonic disaster, acting as a deadly war defense. Much will be destroyed on Mother Earth, badly and very badly, by America's delusion of hegemony, a ruinous roll of madness. This will cause the Earth to tremble and tear the Earth apart, and countless lives and buildings will be destroyed for decades. Wicked wars will come from America's hegemony jungles, murdering, robbing, destroying, and many lives will be taken. America reveals itself as an evil sign in the evil times to come. When its hegemonic delusion cries out for wars and world domination, when evil bursts forth from its centuries-old jungle of power, its greed for world domination and creates an evil war hype. America's greed for hegemony penetrates even the deepest tunnels of the Earth, and the whole thing will roll over the Earth like great quakes, when fire and explosions rumble through hatred and war. The air will be torn apart, tormented, rearing up, groaning and screaming, and enmity will glow furiously in human beings the world over. The hearts of many Earthlings will tremble in the throes of destruction, rearing high at night, and so also by day. The world trembles and blazes in the blast and smoke, enveloped in the foul odor of death. America's hegemonic mania is to be named, through which Earth will burn all around, far into the next millennium, because America is secretly fueling evil, and the world feels it. Monday, the 14th of May, 1948, 2:16 hours Eddy.
Now I remember there was something in Israel back then, a massacre or something.
That is also listed in my grandfather's annals. which I have also photographed, so you can also read it. Here.
Thank you, Quetzal. Svath. That happened on Thursday, the 13th of May, 1948, namely the massacre of Kfar Etzion massacre. It happened yesterday after a battle in which Jewish kibbutz residents and the Haganah militia defended Kfar Etzion against Arab legionnaires who attacked the kibbutz. However, the defenders were forced to lay down their arms and surrender as prisoners, of whom some 130 Jews were then killed, and thus shot, while the kibbutz was looted and razed to the ground.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I remember that now. It was around that time when I went back in time with Sim Yasseh in the 1970s. I was also with Sim Yasseh at other times in Arabia. In Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, etc., and I once wonderingly joined a partisan group, dressing like them, whose members had nothing to do with the Arab legionnaires who carried out the massacre. Moreover, it was at a different time, and a reporter also took a photo of us, on which I am still photographed and which I have kept to this day. This is the picture I have here on the manuscript stand as a memento. You can see me in an Arab outfit among the heavily armed Arab patriots.
Yes, that is indeed you. Undoubtedly, in earthly terms, about 50 or 60 years younger than today, but no doubt you are pictured here. However, your real age is not recognizable because you are young and, as you always say, fit.
Yes, of course, and I also have no reason to hide this or to talk rubbish. What just happened was real. I do not have to tell any fairy tales. I am also not interested in telling any fairy tales, and besides, I only talk about my experiences in the wider world very sparingly and rarely. As a rule, I only do so in passing, and without going into detail, because I do not really want to talk about it, especially when all talk is pointless anyway, such as about those miserable, incompetent elements in governments who destroy and ruin more than is good and right. And the question arises as to why the people do not actually do anything about the lasciviousness of those in power, why they simply let them get away with it, and also say nothing openly against them. This, just as the righteous and the still halfway righteous in government also simply let the lousy elements get away with it, to which I keep asking myself, why is the people so lax and naive and allow completely incompetent rulers in government at all, as mentioned specifically in Switzerland? Since various elements in the federal parliament who are incapable of governing do everything wrong and even commit treasonous and un-Swiss acts and thus do wrong. This, for example, to make a mockery of Switzerland's neutrality, or to try to stifle the Swiss state's very important obligation and responsibility to preserve biodiversity through an election process. This is despite the fact that this is vital for all life forms in nature and its fauna and flora, and therefore also for human beings, but which unfortunately, due to the completely irresponsible machinations of overpopulation, is also doing everything that is destructive and destructive in every form, and has already largely destroyed over 70%. Believe it or not, and in some cases has completely wiped it out worldwide for all time to come. The federal parliament is therefore making completely irresponsible attempts to stifle biodiversity, just as the wolves and beavers are also to be shot down, etc., which is quite insane. On the other hand, various organizations are spending a lot of money on studies and research into how animals, creatures and all wildlife in general could live together with human beings unimpaired and undisturbed so that wild animals, etc., can continue to exist in their own habitat. So the fact that certain animals and creatures should not simply be shot, as has been demanded in an imbecile and lowly intelligent manner, should be considered rationally, if there is any sense. Reason and sense of responsibility left in this obviously damaged person's brain, as to why animals, creatures, and other forms of wildlife no longer have a place to live. This is precisely because motorways are being idiotically built or widened, and houses, factories and sports grounds, etc. are being built instead of the government finally doing something to reduce the mass of crazy overpopulation. This is to blame for all the ills and diseases, the rising crime rate, the crimes, wars, and destruction of human achievements, as well as the serious damage to the planet, the destruction of nature and the extinction of fauna and flora, animals, creatures, and other wildlife. And the reduction of overpopulation could only be achieved, for example, by a worldwide stop to births, which should not only be propagated, but also explained, and possibly also that fathering and giving birth should somehow be stopped voluntarily.
Firstly, I was not thinking of anything like that, namely that you would tell fairy tales, because I know how serious you are about this. Secondly, with regard to what you denounce about the state administrators, there is no doubt about that because your explanation is entirely correct. The peoples are incapable, as regards the persons to be elected to the power of the state, of...
To this I would say, to separate the inferior chaff from the valuable wheat. For the bulk of the electors consist only of sham thinkers, who are incapable of correctly judging those to be elected to office as to their worth of character and worth of action. As a result, all the self-important, power-hungry and unfit for government tastes are elected to the responsible offices of governments and authorities, who then run their big mouths and play their might, even though they know nothing about the whistle and blow of what is happening. And if a person speaks out against this and sets the record straight, they can expect to either be harassed directly, face administrative penalties, or even be taken to court. This is the so-called right to which the citizen is entitled. If we look back to the times when brutally ruling bailiffs, kings and emperors, etc., still harassed the people, the only thing that has changed is that today it is those powerful governments and authorities who do not want to rule, but want to rule and play out their self-importance. This is quite contrary to those who exercise their office seriously and honestly for the good of the people, or who want to do so, but are cut, harassed, and patronized by the power-hungry and autocratic. That of the old bailiwick was actually only modernized, namely in that human beings from the people took over the governments and authorities of the bailiwick, namely in that the rulers and officials are heaved into office by the incomprehensible people, who are absolutely incapable of judging their personalities via an election, to which they then do not do justice, but exercise the might and self-importance they have been granted. So the form of bailiwick, the bailiff as the representative of a feudal lord ruled and judged according to his own whim and fancy, but also on behalf of the feudal lord in his territory, has remained the same. However, this bailiwick has not been abolished to this day, but has only been transformed and changed into a new form with new structures, which, however, harbors and contains within it a vast number of laws, rules, fines, regulations, provisions, decrees and principles, recommendations and decrees, etc., which go far beyond anything that bailiffs and feudal lords had in store and were able to devise in order to rule their subordinate or bailiwicked peoples. Seen and thought of correctly, every nation of every state is still under a bailiwick today, but only the name has been changed, and the respective government exercises the supreme Geovault and might, namely through its authorities, which in turn act with their officials and organizations, etc., of all kinds intended for this, that, and the other. Thus the feudal lords have been transformed and replaced by Geovault and might in the form of state governments, and the bailiffs by the forms of authorities, as a result of which basically everything and anything has remained the same, and has only been transformed in kind and form. In addition, laws, rules, regulations, provisions, decrees and principles, recommendations and decrees, etc. have been added, which are such that today human beings are even more unfree than they were in the times of the bailiffs. Today, we have already reached the point where we are not only largely dependent on modern technology, but are also controlled, privately and by the state, to such an extent that we are much less free than human beings ever were in the past under feudal rule and in the days of the bailiffs. And this will develop in the coming future through the increasing emergence of artificial intelligence into a hopeless and complete catastrophe for humanity on Earth, which is already running carelessly, indifferently, laxly, naively and lowly intelligently, and thus thoughtlessly, and in this respect increasingly degenerating not only into its self-determined misery, but also into its downfall, if it does not finally pull itself together and begin to think consciously and act sensibly. Well, as far as fairy tales are concerned, I had not thought that you might take my words as a fairy tale. Unfortunately, however, it is the case that some human beings on Earth are short thinkers, also with regard to an explanation. Consequently, they are not capable of thinking it through and understanding it. This is not only tiresome, but also tedious, because the same thing has to be explained over and over again. What I am referring to is that I am approached and questioned over and over again about UFOs and foreigners. This with the question of why you Plejaren would not land and make open contact with the Earthlings, since you are peaceful after all. This, as I was told, could finally be answered openly, especially because apparently at night or in the early hours of the morning on German TV channels, films about pre-astronautics are shown over and over again, which deal almost exclusively with extraterrestrials in connection with a god and gods as well as ancient ruins, etc. On the one hand, there is obviously talk of very old times, when UFOs and foreign or flying apparatus as well as extraterrestrials were already around. But they really had nothing to do with you Plejaren from the Anchor universe, and also have nothing to do with you today. However, I do not know why. You Plejaren are constantly being falsely brought into play with questions, very often in direct or also indirect connection with the Pleiades or the Pleiades stars in our Dern universe. It is apparently simply not understood that you do not come from this or our Dern universe, but from the Ankar universe, and thus from a further and different universe of the sevenfold creation, which corresponds to nothing other than nature, or all that exists in the whole. Everything that exists, which was created as a whole from the energy and power of the spacelessness of the nihilo, or the absolute naught, which first energized the absolute absolutum, which energized 6 further absolutum forms, which ultimately gave rise to creations, or nature or existence, which is simply called creation. So now I want to explain for the last time that you Plejaren have nothing to do with foreigners and their UFOs in any wise. Just as you or the Plejaren have nothing to do with human beings on Earth, and also nothing to do with any ancient ruins found and uncovered by earthly archaeologists. And as far as photographs of Plejaren beam ships are concerned, only 4 persons were allowed to take photographs, while only 1 was allowed to take all known photographs. This should now finally say that you Plejaren come from another universe of our creation, and therefore do not belong to our Dern universe, but to the Ankar universe, of which the foreigners with their UFOs obviously have no knowledge and are also unable to penetrate it. The Plejaren have always kept a low profile, for around 25 million years, because their strict directives have always forbidden contact with foreign life forms from other universes. This is also the reason why no contacts with earthly governments exist, and it was recognized in advance, through exploration, that such an attempt would fail when a request was made by Earthlings that you Plejaren should try to make contact with the government of the USA. In other words, an attempt that was already certain to fail at the outset, and therefore only served as proof because illogical demands were made that could not be met by the Plejaren.
That is of correctness, and I have been accurately informed of that. The same applies to everything you have explained. So much is not foreign to me, especially regarding creation energy teaching, which you keep bringing up, which you said the other day that you had received questions about again.
Yes, that is so. But I can imagine that as an orphan boy, you do not have the necessary information and certainly were not ordered here in this way. But here is the question I received, which I do not want to read out in detail because it is more than a page long. Besides, I cannot deal specifically with questions because that is not my job, but teaching and conversations with you, as well as writing books, and so on. Therefore, I will answer the questions by simply repeating an earlier statement as follows, reproducing what has already been written.
Teaching of the truth, teaching of the creation energy, teaching of the life.
The creation, or nature, or existence exists in 7-fold form in itself, in 7 different dimensions, which are interwoven in the same space, but dimensionally separated in a uniform way. Creation therefore contains within itself 7 different dimensions in the same space, each separated from the other, and consequently 7 universes, each divided into 7 levels and each with a material belt, which in our Dern universe is called cosmos by the human beings of Earth. All this is explained as follows: the teaching of creation energy, or the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, does not consist of forming an opinion or a belief of any kind. In general, the teaching has always been called the spiritual teaching. But from now on, the old term spiritual teaching will be replaced by the correct and effectively clear term, and everything will be taught and explained in an understandable manner.
Teaching of the creation energy.
This book, Teaching of Creation Energy, does not simply cover a specific subject, because everything that occurs in the existence of human beings happens solely through the application of creation energy, which alone is the energy for everything and anything that occurs, happens, and results. Without the action of this energy, nothing results, because it is the be-all and end-all of all becoming, existing, working, and passing away. So nothing could be or happen without creation energy. It is to be understood that the origin of all existence only came into being through the becoming of creation energy, namely out of the nothing. The nihilo, the indefinite pronoun nothing, means that not anything, effectively does not exist in the slightest and very least. Nothing is not any something, not anything, thus absolutely nothing, and thus not even a dimension can exist. The nominal phrase nothing refers to that which does not exist, precisely to the opposite of a being, which results as the negation of nothing and thus an absence of being as non-being. Therefore, nothing or nihilo is an absolute emptiness that cannot be determined by anything other than nothingness. When all existence came into being through the origin, namely through the energetic impulse from the nihilo, the absolute nothingness, which is inexplicable to human beings, all absolutum forms came into being and creation came into being from the last form. The nihilo or the nothing and all absolutum forms exist absolutely timelessly in endless duration, or in all eternity and eternally in energy. From the nihilo of endless duration or eternity emerged the primordial process of the emergence of the Seiyin absolutum, from which the Soha absolutum, super absolutum, creation absolutum, central absolutum, absolutum, and finally the absolute absolutum emerged energetically. From this, the first universe of creation then emerged in the first sequence, which was followed by countless others and will be followed endlessly by others in the endless duration or eternity, in order to evolve inexorably in endless duration through all absolutum forms up to the being absolute. The very first energetic impulse for the creation of a further existence arose from the first energetically emerging creation iota, whereby this iota was still immaterial and pure creation energy, but in such a way that it accumulated in itself in the existence of all things, which remained endless duration, inexplicable for human beings, in order to develop into a tiny amount of energy of matter. In the course of the endless duration of all existence, this tininess condensed to such an extent that an energy space suddenly and in a flash expanded out of it, thus creating the space of creation. This space itself also split up in a flash into 7 sections, also called belts, which, as sevenfold creation energy, formed 7 dimensions and thus 7 universes, which from then on all existed in different dimensions in the same creation space as creation energy as a whole, but with different functions, unfortunately very difficult for human beings to understand. In total, therefore, there are 7 dimensions or 7 universes, one of which is that of the presence of human beings on Earth, which, however, he alone can only perceive, or what he is able to perceive with his material senses as reality and its truth. However, a section or belt of the creation space or universe formed as dusty matter, which in the course of the endless duration or eternity molded itself into compactness and resulted in the matter space in which suns, planets and also huge agglomerations and systems, such as comets and asteroids etc. developed, thus creating the cosmos. In the further course of the evolution of the creation energy, a further energetic impulse was formed in the endless duration or eternity, which developed into the origin of all life and spread, seeding itself in all cosmic systems and on many planets and asteroids, etc., from which plants developed. From which plants and the like developed, as later also the tiniest Urky life forms, from which gradually larger and even gigantic life forms of millions of genera and species emerged, as also through natural evolution the human being, namely in the most diverse genera, species, and forms. In the past, the teaching of truth, the teaching of creation energy, the teaching of life was called the teaching of the spirit, according to the naturalized incorrect term. But now the time has come for everything to be called by its correct name and for the erroneous to be pointed out in the right way. And this has become possible because a certain small part of humanity in this world has advanced and evolved in its understanding of knowledge to such an extent that it now has the understanding that many things can be called by their correct name and value and understood, so that the same thing does not happen again, as happened when religions arose from teaching. It was decided to write this book so that the majority of earthly humanity can finally free itself from its low intelligence or non-self thinking, and thus from religious and worldly beliefs by means of logic, understanding and reason to make its own correct decisions and actions for this and that. The aim is to communicate subjectively the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, by making reality and its truth accessible, and explaining it to human beings on earth so that they can understand it and make use of it. It should also be passed on, at least to those who may be interested. However, there should be no indoctrination, but rather a teaching of the neighbor in such a way that he himself decides for or against the content of the teaching, and thus for its application or rejection. Therefore, no human being should allow himself to be influenced by any person and decide completely voluntarily about his personal weal and woe, and thus about accepting or rejecting the teaching. This, however, requires full-fledged thoughts either way, which every human being should make in an intelligible form. Consequently, low intelligence thinking or unworthy thinking in the form of faith-based illusory thoughts never brings a result of fullness, because no thought material that really comes about in logic, understanding, and reason, but only delusional thoughts of faith are always in the foreground, which gives stupidity the upper hand.
All this should be said and explained once again for all those who have not understood this, and I hope that it will now be understood. Otherwise, you can read all about it in the documents available at Figu.
Then Enjana and I must unfortunately go again now, dear father friend. Consequently, I say goodbye, but come back soon.
Stay well and see you later.
Then goodbye too, dear friend.
And they are gone again. Well, what I want to talk about now is that I was asked why Protestantism is actually called progress, since it has somehow created differences and even enmity between Protestants and Catholics. I would like to ask you what you can say about this.
I cannot answer that question because I am not knowledgeable enough about this kind of thing to be able to give a definitive answer. You are probably more educated in this wise, so you have to answer the question yourself.
If you mean, then it should probably be so. And when I consider all of this, what my insights are, well, something to say about it, that should dash. Then I find that this related thing actually already occurred 2 times in the entire history of mankind in ancient times. Namely when Emmanuel brought the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life. And this was mendaciously and deceitfully transformed into a religious false doctrine. This, as he himself was falsely renamed as the Son of God in Jesus and much later still in Jesus Christ, as various sects also arose from his teaching. Around 455 years later came Muhammad, called Abdul Qasim Muhammad ibn Abdallah, who again brought the same teaching to the Arab world, and thus appeared in roughly the same wise founding Islam. Unfortunately, this also resulted in misinterpretations and thus false teachings, as well as various Islamic religious groupings that emerged from this. This is because everything was interpreted from Muhammad's correct teachings into very false teachings, as with Emmanuel, as a result of misunderstanding and being misjudged by the scholar. And consequently, various Islamic and Christian faiths and groupings emerged, as well as special sects, and of course also completely false judgments.
More is known to you about that than to me. But now, Edward, I have to go, but I will be back in 2 or 3 hours, but at 3.00 hours or 3.30 hours at the latest.
But then I would like to show you briefly some things that Bernadette has written, regarding requests that I think are of the value that they should also be mentioned in this conversation report.
There is still time for that.
Then please hear.
Sprinkles from the correspondence, 2, from Bernadette Brand.
Over the last few weeks, I have again accumulated a few speckles from the correspondence that are of general interest, and have raised questions whose answers are of general interest and can prevent some misunderstandings. Some of the questions centered on the so-called Incarnation, which does not exist, and is only a fantasy or figment of the imagination. I have written the following brief comment on this. It should be said in advance that the term incarnation is completely wrong and is also misunderstood, because it is not a matter of an incarnation, as the term incarnation implies, but of a beliving of a human being, that is to say an embryo, on the 21st day after conception by a creation energy form, with a new personality, which is why it is therefore correct to use the term beliving instead of the wrong term incarnation, which I will also implement in my answers.
Question: what are the determining factors for either the earlier incarnation from the afterlife or the longer wait in the afterlife?
Answer: even Billy cannot answer this question exhaustively, because he also does not know what exactly causes the revitalization through a creation energy form. However, the power factor certainly plays a decisive role. This means that the more the human being learns during his acute life, the more power he or his creation energy form develops, which means that although it is able to form a new personality more quickly, it may remain in the so-called beyond for longer, until the average overall evolution on the planet has progressed to the point where the creation energy form can enter a revitalization process again.
Question: are all creation energy forms really equally active in the reincarnation cycle?
Answer: no, they are not, because the activity of the creation energy forms is dependent on their power, which means that it just gets stronger the more the human being learns in the acute life. Human beings who learn little or nothing can add little or no power to their creation energy form, which means that it evolves more slowly, which can slow down the entire evolutionary process on a planet. In addition, overpopulation plays a decisive role, due to which the entire revitalization cycle is completely mixed up, which in turn means that creation energy forms also have to revitalize a newly conceived human being who has not yet been able to consolidate the new personality to be built up enough.
Question: recently, I read an old letter from Billy to the People's Republic of China about the abuse of the death penalty, which is mainly used to promote the internal black market for organs. What struck me most about this letter concerns one of the reasons that make the death penalty useless and, in a sense, dangerous, but also inhumane and criminal. That is, the condemned person will most likely form their next personality back in the place country where the sentence was carried out, and will in turn produce a new personality due to the violent interruption of the evolutionary process of the total consciousness block GBB. Some characteristics of the GBB still exhibit the former personality, which will most likely result in the new personality committing the same or similar crimes as those that led to the conviction of the predecessor personality. This is not in contrast to the fact that the different personalities have no connection to the nation and/or culture to which they belong. resulting in the GBB and the energetic creational form always being reborn in the same place and/or country as well as the same culture? Perhaps the danger highlighted by Billy in this letter, given the new information about the location of reincarnations, concerns not only the place where the death penalty is practiced, in this case China, but the entire planet, as the condemned could be reborn virtually anywhere.
Answer. Basically, it is the case that the creation energy form of human beings is absolutely neutral, and that it is a pure force vibration. Although it does contain impulses of knowledge and experience from the lives of previous personalities. But that is also all. There is no other connection, neither to a country, nor to a culture or a particular place, because basically human beings and what they have to learn are the same in all cultures and countries. It is not about a culture or country-specific experience, but about the core experience. For example, that human beings should practice patience, tolerance, or neutrality. These core values are the same in all nations and cultures. However, it is possible for a form of creation energy to revitalize a new human being several times in the same culture, or even in the same country, depending on when the form of creation energy is called upon. As long as human beings do not really begin to think for themselves and continue to be dependent on any religious, sectarian, or worldly forms of belief, there is always the danger on the entire planet that a human being will suddenly become Ausartung and develop into a perpetrator of violence. The human being can only learn to control his thoughts and consciously avoid harmful urges or impulses by thinking for himself. As long as he is a slave to a belief, he cannot mobilize the inner strength he needs for self-knowledge and self-control, or only with great difficulty. Unfortunately, this answer apparently led to another blatant misunderstanding, which was then also unfortunately spread in a chat room. Fortunately, this was brought to my attention, after which I was able to intervene further to clarify and clear up the misunderstanding. Claim. In a nutshell, Bernadette claims that it is possible for a SF creation energy form to continue. The term reincarnate is not correct, but sufficient to explain the concept of the message, to return to the same culture and/or country, depending on when that SEF is called. In other words, if the lifespan is shortened by external causes such as capital punishment, it is possible for the same SEF to reincarnate into the same cultural circle and/or country. And also, so if one dies before the allotted time by homicide, suicide, accident, etc., it is likely that the next personality will form in the same culture and/or country. Fortunately, knowing this misunderstanding gave me the opportunity to clarify my answer and explain everything in more detail. Clarification. Unfortunately, there are always misunderstandings, and you can prevent them by asking first. That would have been the solution. Continue life exactly there. Does not mean that the creation energy form has to revive a new human being in the same culture, in the same country, or even in the same place, but it means that the creation energy form can only store as knowledge what has been learnt, at least to some extent. It does not develop knowledge, but merely transforms the quintessence of what the human being has learnt in an active life into energetic knowledge impulses. This means that the creation energy form brings back exactly the level of knowledge that the previously deceased human being, or the human being who died as a result of capital punishment, murder, accident, etc., had acquired at the time of his or her passing. The next human being whom the creation energy form revitalizes begins his evolution in terms of knowledge and evolution exactly at the point where the previous personality is deceased. So, when a murderer is executed by capital punishment, which is also murder, the human being who has become a murderer usually has no time to reconsider his deed and realize that he has acted wrongly. That is why the subsequent personality will then continue his life exactly where the previous personality was executed, regardless of the culture, country, or place where the previous personality lived and murdered. The German language has many idioms that are to be understood in a figurative sense, and should therefore not be taken literally, as they can usually have two or more different meanings depending on the context. That is why it is always better for foreign speakers who are not really good at German to ask before they create a misunderstanding.
Question: could it be that there is an error in the 19th chapter of the book Might of Thoughts? In the version I received from you for translating the book, it says, "The human being, unfree in himself, wears in his life chains forged by himself, which not only bind him, but which also build up fear in him link by link." However, this reveals the strange circumstance that human beings both love and hate their self-imposed imprisonment, and thus also their constricting chains. And it is precisely this strange error in consciousness that explains, at least in part, why it is so difficult for each individual to free themselves from their fears on their own initiative, and also to actually get rid of them. However, the possibility of getting rid of fears is actually given to every human being. However, the path to overcoming fear is not an easy one to take, but it is actually worthwhile for every individual who is afflicted by fear to take the path and follow it. And once the fear disappears, the relief quickly becomes intense and overwhelming, almost painful, but the consciousness and its thoughts quickly adjust and create a feeling of indescribable joy. The whole thing is an extraordinary experience that also destroys inferiority complexes and obsessive thoughts of failure. There is fear twice here, but as a plural, or fears, and reading this passage, I think fear fits better than fears because this is talking about fear management.
Answer: the passage you asked about is completely correct for the following reason. As Billy explained to me, in the passage from Might of Thoughts that you ask about, it says that the human being who is unfree in himself carries within him self-forged chains that bind him and that build up fear in him link by link. This means that the human being is afraid of all possible known consequences. However, instead of fighting his fear and resolving it through independent, rational and realistic thoughts and corresponding actions, he deals with the possible effects of the known consequences and builds up fears from these eventualities in relation to assumptions about what the known consequences could still entail. By constantly expanding on the fearfully imagined effects of the known consequences and constantly preoccupying himself with them, he ultimately fuels his fears to such an extent that he can no longer let go of them and literally binds himself with their chains. Anxiety is therefore the direct consequence of a fear that is not dealt with correctly. That is to say, in a realistic and truthful manner, and that is not dealt with and resolved in a sensible and intelligent way. Coping with fear can therefore only happen if human beings deal with their fears and resolve them through truthful, independent, and rational thinking, as a result of which not only do the fears disappear completely, but also their consequences, such as inferiority complexes and fears of failure, because by resolving fear, all the shackles that human beings have put on themselves through their wrong thinking fall away. I hope that I have been able to explain the section in question and the connections between fear and anxiety to you in an understandable way.
This is really worth mentioning in this conversation report. However, I want to talk to you about that when I come back. But see you later. See you again.
Take care. See you again later.